There was a time when I believed love was simple, an unshakable force that would guide me through any storm. Before Penny, my world had been straightforward: work, school, and the occasional night out with friends. I wasn't the kind of guy who sought out adrenaline or chased fleeting excitement. My life was measured in routines and the steady rhythm of responsibility. But Penny was different. She didn't believe in standing still. She thrived on motion, on risk, on pushing boundaries just to see how far she could go. And somehow, despite knowing we were nothing alike, I fell for her anyway. Our relationship had always been a balancing act between my caution and her recklessness. She pulled me into a world of speed and thrill, and I held her steady when she lost control. At first, I thought we complemented each other perfectly. But as time went on, I started wondering, was I truly a part of her adventure, or was I just someone she needed to hold her coat while she chased her next high? That thought lingered in the back of my mind as we arrived at the amusement park that day, my stomach already twisted with more than just fear of the rides. It was a perfect late summer day when I stumbled off the ride and headed for the restroom, my stomach still churning from the roller coaster. I passed a father and his son standing in the doorway, deep in conversation about whether the boy needed to go to the bathroom. I knew the answer before they did. Judging by the stain on the kid's shorts, he'd already gone. I quickly made my way inside, one hand pressed to my mouth, trying not to lose it. I was alone in the restroom, and fortunately, my stomach settled before things got worse. I stared at myself in the mirror, irritated with myself. Why did I keep letting myself get roped into things I was terrified of? The answer was simple: love. Back then, I loved Penny. Everything about her. She was beautiful, with dark, wavy hair and a smile that could light up any room. She could have had anyone, but for some reason, she chose me. We spent most of my day off at Great Lakes Adventures, with Penny dragging me from one high adrenaline ride to the next. I hated heights, but for her, I kept getting on. I finally made it out of the restroom and saw Penny with her sister Julie and her friend Rebecca. Julie, tired of the rides, was ready to eat, but Penny wasn't hearing it. As usual, I ended up doing what I promised her parents, making sure Julie had a good time. I gave Penny some money for another ride, and while she and Rebecca went off, I took Julie to find something to eat. I couldn't help but wonder how long Penny would keep chasing thrills, how long I could keep up.
Watching Penny walk away with Rebecca, I couldn't help but feel frustrated. She and I were worlds apart. While she kept her hair short and carefree, I preferred mine long and taken care of. We shared the same smoky brown eyes, but hers were sharp and focused like our dad's. Mine were softer, more like Mom's. Penny was always chasing excitement, dragging Greg along with her, never considering how it affected him. He hated heights, but she pushed him on ride after ride. I couldn't understand why he let her get away with it. He spoiled her, always giving in to whatever she wanted, no matter the cost. At 19, I was old enough to see it. Penny was selfish, and Greg was so desperate to make her happy that he let her walk all over him. As we wandered through the park looking for food, I couldn't hold back. I had to say something. He needed to stop letting her treat him this way. But Greg just brushed it off and tried to shift the focus to food. I wasn't hungry, but I knew I had to eat something since I wouldn't be allowed to eat in his Mustang. As I walked back to the roller coaster with Rebecca, she teased me about how I always seemed to get the good guys. She had no idea. I didn't care much for labels, but I wasn't going to deny it. I knew exactly what I wanted, and Greg was it. Sure, I liked my thrill-seeking life, but I wanted a future too. I wasn't interested in a career or college. I wanted to be a wife, a mother, and live a simple life with Greg. College had been a waste, and I didn't need a job. My plan was clear: marry Greg, have kids, and stay home. Rebecca joked about me getting a job before I had kids, but she didn't get it. Being a stay-at-home mom was a choice, not something to look down on. I would raise kids like Greg, smart, strong, and beautiful. And that would be my contribution to the world. As we waited in line for the roller coaster, I was still angry about my parents pressuring me to get a job like Julie. It was exhausting, but I knew my life was already set. When the time came, Greg and I would make it work. He'd make enough money, and I wouldn't have to deal with the boring stuff. He wasn't what I'd call handsome, but there was something raw about him. Dirty, With wild hair and worn clothes, he looked like a guy who didn't care about appearances. But he knew it. His confidence was undeniable. He spoke like he knew exactly how to push my buttons. When he asked why I was interested in a ride, I shrugged it off. But his response got under my skin. He suggested a cheaper ride so all of us could go together. It was supposed to be a joke, but I didn't find it funny. I wasn't about to pay for him and his friend. His attitude only annoyed me more. He didn't back off, though. He teased me, asking if I could handle the ride without holding on. That challenge made me defensive, and I couldn't let him win. So, I stayed stubborn and didn't grab the handrail when the coaster took off. As the ride climbed higher, I felt the familiar rush of excitement. But when we started descending, it wasn't just the thrill that hit me. His hands, which had no business being where they were, did. I froze, unsure of how to react. Maybe it was the adrenaline, the way everything seemed to blur together. But when I finally moved his hands away, I told him I had a boyfriend. He didn't care. In the midst of the ride's twists and turns, his hands found their way back, and before I knew it, they were sliding lower. I was too overwhelmed to stop him in the moment, unsure if I even wanted to. The mix of danger and excitement, the illicit thrill of it all, had a strange power over me, but when I snapped out of it, I pushed him off. The ride ended, and I rushed to find Greg, desperate for some sense of normalcy. I kissed him, hoping it would erase the lingering confusion I felt. But the guilt sat heavy, especially as I held his hand on the way home. It didn't help that Julie was there, constantly hanging around, leaving me no space to breathe. When we finally got back to my house, I practically begged Greg for a moment alone. His kiss was intense, too intense. It stirred something in me that I didn't want to deal with. But Julie was still there, watching, and I had to fight the urge to pull Greg into the shadows and forget everything else. I tried to ignore the whirlwind of emotions inside me, but it wasn't easy. I felt it immediately after Greg kissed me. The overwhelming sense of love. It wasn't just the thrill of a kiss. It was a feeling of belonging, of something deeper that swept over me every time his lips touched mine. It wasn't the dizziness of a roller coaster ride. It was something more intoxicating, a feeling that lingered long after the kiss ended. As I stood there, Greg's smile made everything feel perfect. In my daydream, I imagined a life with him, us in a beautiful house with kids running around, Greg playing with them while they told him they loved him. The image was almost too perfect, and I didn't know what to do with it. Greg snapped me out of my reverie, asking if I was okay. I smiled, but something about his question made me uneasy. My younger sister Julie was staring at me with an unreadable look, her lips tight, and I couldn't help but wonder if she was annoyed. But I just shrugged it off, telling Greg that his kisses always took me to another place. Julie, as usual, wasn't in a great mood. She started singing "Take My Breath Away" as she headed into the house, clearly irritated. Greg waved goodbye, and I floated inside, lost in my thoughts, not realizing how much everything was about to change. As I walked to my room, Julie passed me, shaking her head. I laughed, but she stopped and turned around to come into my room. She had something to say, and it wasn't what I expected. She was angry. Julie told me that Greg deserved better than what I was doing, letting another guy touch me while my boyfriend was so close. Her words hit harder than I wanted them to. I never expected Julie to call me out like that, but she was right. It was stupid. I tried to brush it off, making a joke, but her anger made me realize she wasn't just the annoying little sister anymore. She was an adult, and she was pissed. Before I could respond, my phone rang, and I smiled, thinking it was Greg. It was almost a ritual. He called before bed and first thing in the morning. But it wasn't Greg. It was Becky. Bucket. She teased me, pretending to be Greg, and then reminded me that the guys we met at the park wanted to meet up. I sighed, not in the mood for this, but I couldn't ignore her when she was insistent. She'd given Ronnie her number, and now they were planning to meet. I couldn't believe how quickly she bounced from guy to guy, forgetting all about Jason, who she'd just told me might be the one this morning. Becky laughed off her own contradictions, explaining her plan to meet these guys and get some attention. She wanted me to come along. I refused. I couldn't imagine doing anything that would hurt Greg, and the thought of him finding out about me with another guy, especially after what I'd just done, made me sick. I couldn't risk losing him. But Becky wouldn't let it go. She pressed me to come, saying there were 3 guys and she might need backup. I felt torn. Part of me wanted to say no, but I knew deep down that I couldn't leave her to handle things alone. Still, something about all of this didn't sit right, and I didn't know how long I could keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't.
The next morning, I woke up and called Penny, but she didn't pick up. I figured she was still asleep after yesterday's excitement at the park. I left a quick message telling her I loved her, then headed off to work. The day went by as usual, reports, invoices, and minor revisions to drawings. But toward the end of the morning, my boss called me into his office. He asked if I was skilled with Mastercam, and I told him I was. He handed me a broken support bracket from one of our clients' cars and told me we needed to replace it. Since these parts often broke, my boss decided we should make them in-house to save time and money. He wanted me to reverse engineer it, make it stronger, and draw up the plans for a new version. I was thrilled. It was the kind of project I'd been waiting for. At lunch, I went to a jewelry store in the mall, feeling proud of my work. Julie, Penny's younger sister, spotted me as I walked in. "Hey, Greg," she said, grinning. "Back to make another contribution or just take another look?" "I'll just contribute," I replied. "But with the bonus I might get for this project. I might be able to pick it up soon." Julie shook her head. "I hope my sister realizes how lucky she is," she muttered, handing me an updated receipt for the ring. She called her boss over, who asked, "Greg, do you want to take the ring now? You only owe $300. "Thanks, but I haven't proposed yet. She might say no," I answered. He laughed. She'd be crazy to say no. He called over his daughter, Helena, and asked, "If Penny turns Greg down, will you marry him instead?" Helena smiled and nodded. "She'll have to get in line behind me," Julie joked. I left the store feeling good, heading back to work, excited about what the day might bring.
Becky went through with her reckless plan and broke up with Jason, even though I couldn't understand why. Jason had been the only decent guy who saw past Becky's reputation and truly cared for her. She threw that away for no reason. Becky was complicated. She had a kind, caring side, always helping others, but she lacked boundaries. She'd sleep with anyone who showed interest, no matter who they were or what they looked like. We met the guys at a park near my house early in the morning. I wanted to get this over with before Greg came home from work. Becky had a late shift at the diner, so we had some time. The guys showed up in an old truck. Ronnie went straight to Becky, and Brett walked toward me. I ignored him. Becky and Ronnie disappeared into the bushes, and the third guy followed. I was relieved that things were happening quickly. Then Brett pulled out his phone and showed me pictures from the day before. First, there were some shots of us on the roller coaster, but then things turned ugly. The next photos showed him grabbing my chest, and even worse, his hand in my underwear. My stomach dropped. I felt sick, but Brett acted like it was no big deal. He made it clear that if I didn't do what he wanted, he could spread the photos. I didn't know what to do, but I knew I didn't have a choice. The rush of adrenaline made me go through with it, though I hated myself for it. It was humiliating and felt like I was losing a part of myself. Afterward, Becky and Ronnie came out of the bushes, laughing. Becky was shocked when she saw what had happened, but I was too disgusted to care. I grabbed Brett's phone, deleted the pictures and video, and handed it back to him, demanding he never show anyone else. I slapped Becky, furious with her for making me go through this. She didn't seem to care, brushing it off like it was nothing. She mentioned getting back together with Jason, but I wasn't even sure if I cared anymore. At home, I immediately took a long shower, trying to scrub the feeling of shame away, but no matter how much I tried, it stayed with me. I cried for hours, swearing I would never let myself get in that position again. As much as I hated myself for what I had done, a part of me blamed Greg. If Greg had just gone on the roller coaster with me, none of this would have happened. He knew me well. He knew I craved a thrill, and if he loved me like he claimed, he would have done it. But Greg always avoided roller coasters, and now everything was falling apart because of it. Lost in my thoughts, my door slammed open, pulling me back to reality. Julie stormed in, visibly furious, her chest rising and falling with every breath. For the first time, I noticed how much bigger her chest was than mine. She was shorter and smaller in almost every way, except for that. Julie had clearly inherited our mom's figure, along with those wide, innocent eyes. Julie called me stupid, her anger boiling over. I didn't have the patience to deal with her drama after everything that had already happened. She told me Jason Daniels wasn't with Becky anymore. In fact, he'd just hit her in the middle of town. Apparently, Becky had approached him outside the diner where she worked, probably trying to patch things up, but it didn't go well. Jason had been watching her, and when the police arrived, he told them everything. He even mentioned me, claiming I'd been there too. My stomach dropped. I quickly denied it, insisting I'd been at home the whole time and that Becky had covered for me. But Julie walked out without another word. Soon after, Becky called me, barely able to speak through her tears. Jason's story had been convincing enough that the police believed him, and Becky had agreed not to press charges. In the end, it was Becky who got the brunt of the consequences. She was charged with public indecency and hit with a hefty fine. Meanwhile, Jason got sympathy from the public for how devastated he seemed, and Becky realized too late that she'd lost him. I didn't even have time to process it before I realized that Greg would find out sooner or later. News like this spread fast in a small town. Becky apologized, saying she'd tried to cover for me, but there was no hiding what had happened. Jason had seen everything with his own eyes, and now there was a video of me. If Greg saw it, it would be over for me. Becky warned me that Jason would never forgive her, and if Greg saw the video, neither would he. I told Becky to get Ronnie to call Brett so I could talk to him. When Ronnie answered, he didn't make it easy. He mocked me, revealing how he'd convinced me to go into the bushes with him and threatened to expose everything. I snapped back at him, trying to get him to cooperate, but he wasn't budging. Desperate, I threatened Ronnie with my uncle, a cop, and promised I'd make his life miserable if he didn't hand over the tape. Finally, Ronnie backed down, agreeing to put me on the phone with Brett. Brett didn't waste time taunting me, asking what I would give him in exchange for the tape. I demanded he destroy it, making it clear that if he didn't, I'd make his life just as complicated as mine had become. He didn't take me seriously at first, but I pressed harder, threatening to go public with everything. In the end, Brett agreed to meet me the next morning to hand over the tape, but only on his terms. He made it clear that he was married, but that didn't stop him from exploiting me. Becky whispered, unsure of what to do next. I hung up, angry at Becky for getting me into this mess. If she hadn't begged me to go with her and mess around with Ronnie, I wouldn't be stuck in this nightmare. Julie was staring at me, disgust clear in her eyes, as if I were something she'd want to scrape off her shoe. She asked if I'd really been with that guy in the park, and if I was planning to do it again. Her judgment stung, but I fired back, explaining how much I liked the thrill and how Greg wasn't perfect either. I blamed him for not going on that roller coaster with me. If he had, none of this would have happened. Julie's response shocked me. She told me Greg had been with me on those rides all day, despite his severe fear of heights. He'd done it because he loved me, and I hadn't even noticed how sick he was getting. He wasn't perfect, but he worked hard to build a future for us. She pointed out that while Greg worked nonstop, Steve, his friend, had plenty of free time and went to the beach with us. But she reminded me, Greg wasn't aiming for a job like Steve's. He was working to secure a future, especially for the two of us. When I pressed her about Greg, she revealed something I hadn't known. He'd been spending almost every cent he earned this summer on the 2-carat engagement ring he bought for me. That stung, but I couldn't deny it made me feel even worse. I spent the next hours waiting for Greg to call, but he didn't. This was the first time he hadn't called, even after an argument. I felt empty, realizing how badly I'd screwed up. If he saw that tape, or if anyone else did, there'd be no hope of fixing things between us. I had to get rid of it, or it would destroy everything. I tried to focus on the plan. I had to meet Brett, get the phone, and make sure no copies of the video were left. I couldn't let this mistake follow me forever. When I met Brett at the park, he was alone, just as I'd requested. He had a new iPhone, and I knew immediately he wasn't trusting me. After making sure he didn't have any cameras or recording devices, I demanded we end this mess. I made it clear I wasn't doing this because I wanted to. I was being coerced, just like before. Brett insisted I'd agreed to this and pushed me to follow through. I told him this whole thing was a mistake from the start. He tried to convince me that we could keep this quiet, but I wasn't buying it anymore. I'd made a huge mistake, and I wasn't about to make it worse. Before anything could happen, I heard the sound of motorcycles approaching. I didn't pay attention until voices broke through the air, and I froze. 2 bikers had arrived, and one of them made a crude comment about me. One biker asked if I was Brett's girlfriend, and Brett and I both denied it at the same time. The biker smirked and said they'd borrow me for a while. I laughed, trying to stay calm, and reminded them that Brett was an MMA fighter who could easily take them down. But the bikers didn't seem impressed. As soon as I spoke, I heard someone crashing through the bushes. Brett quickly disappeared, leaving behind his pants and the phone I'd come for. I grabbed the phone and left his clothes on the bench. The bikers were immediately hostile, making it clear they didn't care about the phone. I told them about the video Brett had on it, how he'd been blackmailing me, but they only laughed when they saw it. One of them grabbed my arm, pulling me toward his motorcycle. I resisted, kicking and screaming, but no one was around to help. Frustrated, the biker hit me. The pain was intense, knocking the fight out of me. Dazed and scared, I reluctantly got on the bike, hoping to avoid another blow. After a short ride, he repositioned me in front of him, holding me as we arrived at a house near the park that I recognized. Inside, he dragged me up to a room with a dirty mattress on the floor, slamming the door behind us. Fear overwhelmed me. I realized my phone was still in my pocket, and with trembling hands, I texted Becky and Julie, telling them where I was and to call the police. As I stuffed the phone back in my pocket, another biker entered the room. He commented on my appearance and tried to offer me a beer to help me relax. I refused at first, but when he moved quickly to force it on me, I complied. The beer hit my stomach, and almost immediately I felt a warmth spread through me, dulling my fear. After that, my memory fades.
I was riding high that morning. Bill Miller, my boss, had just praised my work. He liked the design changes I'd made, smaller, stronger, and more efficient. Plus, I kept all the original specs. He even hinted that I could land a full-time position after graduation. I was thrilled. My bonus this week was going to help with a few things I'd been putting off. But just as I was basking in the good news, my thoughts turned to Jason. We'd spoken the night before, and I knew he was struggling. He'd been talking about leaving town, and it sounded like he was serious. I'd heard the rumors about Becky, but I never thought they were true until Jason's call. Becky had dumped him again, just like she had before, but this time, it felt different. Jason was crushed when he found out the truth. Becky had been seeing someone else. He was done, and this time, he wasn't going back to her. Becky had tried to get in touch, but Jason was ignoring her. Then, she showed up at his work and caused a scene, twisting the story, blaming him for their breakup. It was the final straw for Jason. He confronted her with everything he knew, about the guy in the park, about seeing it all with his own eyes. She tried to deny it, but Jason wasn't buying it. He told her it was over, and that he was done. Then, the police showed up. After that, Jason decided to leave town and transfer to a college in another state. He needed to get away from Becky and the mess she'd made. Our town was too small to escape her. I wished him luck and hoped we'd catch up in the summer. But before we hung up, Jason said something that left me uneasy. Becky had told the cops that Jason was wrong, that it wasn't her, and then she'd said it wasn't Penny either. That hit me hard. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more I wondered. Penny had never been involved in any of Becky's drama before, but now, maybe she was. Jason told me to be careful with who I trusted, especially with my heart. He said I should trust but verify. I hung up, still processing everything, when I noticed I had voicemails from Penny. Normally, she wouldn't leave messages unless something was wrong, and I could hear the anxiety in her voice. I didn't know what to make of it, but something felt off. Instead of calling her back right away, I tried to get some clarity. I called Julie, hoping she could shed some light on the situation. Julie was straightforward and would tell me the truth, no matter how ugly it was. But she didn't answer either. I wasn't about to involve my family, though. If my brother picked up the phone, I'd have to explain everything, and I wasn't ready for that. So I did what I always did when I was overwhelmed. I ignored it. I played video games to clear my head, but nothing worked. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jason had said. The next morning, I stopped by the diner, hoping to talk to Becky. I figured she'd lie to me, but I'd be able to tell. However, when I got there, Mary, the owner, told me Becky had called in sick. Mary was convinced Becky had gotten what was coming to her, and Becky had been crying on the phone. I was back at square one. I ate breakfast and went to work, wondering if I should just leave town like Jason. But then I realized I couldn't judge Penny without knowing the full story. She deserved better than that. Just as I was thinking about it, my phone rang. It was Becky, sounding frantic. She said there was a big problem, but she couldn't talk about it. I didn't have time for vague answers, so I hung up and switched over to Julie's call. She sounded panicked, too, saying Penny had sent her a message. I read it, and my stomach dropped. Julie had already called the police, but there wasn't much they could do yet. I went back to Becky, and this time she admitted everything. She'd done it on purpose, thinking she could get away with it, but Penny was just a casualty in her mess. Becky confessed that she'd been with the guy 3 times, including that day. I felt a wave of disbelief, but at least now I knew the truth. Becky was still trying to justify it, saying Penny loved me. But I was done listening to her excuses. I told her to meet me in the park. I had a feeling I knew where this was all going. Penny and I had spent hours talking in the park when we first started dating, often driving around afterward. I remembered a house nearby, always with motorcycles parked out front. Penny didn't think the police would take her seriously after everything that had happened, so I decided to handle it myself. I called Julie, urging her to tell her father what was going on, but she hadn't yet. I reassured her I would find Penny. As I drove to the park, I dialed the police. I wasn't sure of all the details, but I knew we were done and it was time to get to the bottom of it.
I woke up in a hospital bed, the bright light above stinging my eyes. My family was standing around me, but none of them were smiling. My mother held my hand, but pulled away when I opened my eyes. My father's voice cut through the tension, full of anger and confusion. He demanded to know what was wrong with me, but I ignored him, trying to sit up. That's when I noticed the tube in my hand and felt the panic rising. My mind raced, searching for Greg. He had come for me. I remembered that clearly. But before I could ask again, Julie crossed the room and slapped me. My father barely managed to hold her back. My heart was pounding now as I asked again, "Where's Greg?" But he wouldn't answer. Instead, Julie slapped me again. I tried to fight back, but it was no use. As I reached for my phone, a security guard and police officer rushed in. My father helped pull Julie away. Julie hissed that I should go to jail, and the officer let her out. My hands were shaking as I told my father that Greg had saved me, that he fought for me. But his face dropped, his disappointment crushing. He told me Greg was in terrible condition and the doctors were fighting to save him. I couldn't breathe. "Why?" my father asked, his voice breaking. "Why did you do this?" He was looking at me like I was the one who had all the answers, but I didn't have any. It was all too surreal. He went on, describing how Greg had been everything he could hope for, a good guy who loved me. He even mentioned how Greg had scrimped and saved to buy me a beautiful ring, something I couldn't even bring myself to feel proud of now. Then the bombshell came. My father wanted to know if Greg had hurt me. I told him no, that Greg was gentle, loving, nothing like what he feared. Still, my father couldn't understand. The anger in his voice rose. He was embarrassed. Our family had become the joke of the town, and my father's work was suffering because of it. I felt sick to my stomach. but I couldn't find the words to explain. He asked about the man I was with. He didn't understand how Greg had ended up so badly beaten, not when he was supposed to be some MMA fighter. But then he dropped the truth. Greg wasn't a fighter. He wasn't even who he said he was. He was married to another woman, and I'd fallen for a fraud. My father's words felt like a slap. I had trusted him. I felt the shame weigh on me, but I couldn't deny the truth. Greg had lied to me. But then my father mentioned something that made my heart twist. Greg had fought for me, and the whole town had seen it. Some thought he was a hero. Others thought he was a fool. My father said they were both right. When I asked if he would have done the same for Mom, he admitted he wasn't sure. He loved her, but not if he knew she was cheating. Greg had followed me despite everything I had done. That was what confused him the most. The silence between us grew heavy as he rubbed his temple. He wasn't sure if Greg would pull through, and honestly, I wasn't either. But I knew one thing for sure. I needed Greg. I couldn't live without him. "Please, Dad," I said quietly. "He'll make it through." But even I wasn't convinced. My father's eyes were full of disappointment as he looked at me. "Have you heard of the internet?" he asked. "Your photos and the news of what happened are everywhere. People are waiting to see if Greg will wake up. You really think this will just blow over?" I had no response. Every word he said only made the weight on my chest heavier. "Have you noticed the policeman and security guard outside your room?" he asked, his tone colder now. I frowned. "Is the cop there to keep me from running away?" "You're not just a victim," he replied flatly. "You're also facing accusations." "What?" I blinked. "Do you remember what Becky got fined for?" he asked. $500, but that was different. She was behind a hedge. You were out in the open, so your fine will be higher, and you did it twice. I swallowed hard, the words sinking in. "And on top of that, you're being accused of involvement in Greg's beating," he continued. "They're trying to pin it on you because if it weren't for you, none of this would have happened." "Great. So I'm a criminal now," I muttered sarcastically, unable to stop myself. "But why is there a security guard? What's he gonna do that the cop can't?" My father's voice turned cold. "The guard is here to protect you from the cops. They hate you." I froze, trying to process what he was saying. "The governor sent a team to investigate the police department after everything went down," he explained. "Our police force is tiny. There were 5 officers at the house when I arrived. They wouldn't let me in. They told me if I didn't leave, they'd liquidate me. Said they called the state police for backup." My stomach churned. Then this young cop came in waving a tool. She called the others cowards, and they just stood there looking at the ground. Then we heard a rifle blast. And after that, silence. I couldn't breathe. They think she got one of them before they took her tool and overpowered her. And right then, the second group of bikers arrived. "Wait, another group of bikers?" I asked, a chill running through me. "Yeah, the cops took off. They thought the second group would side with the first, but they didn't. We found out the truth later from Terry." "Who's Terry?" I asked, confused. "She's a cop. She told us what happened when she got there." My head was spinning. "Dad, I'm tired." "You've been asleep for over a day," he said. "The police are going to question you soon. What do you remember?" "They sedated my drink," I whispered. "I don't remember anything." He just looked at me, then gently pulled the blanket over me. "Rest, Penny." In the following days, I was bombarded with questions. Therapists, police profilers, sketch artists. It felt like the same story over and over. I began to hate hearing my own voice. Every day I asked if I could see Greg. Every day the answer was the same. He was still unconscious. It only got worse. 3 surgeries, and still, he was in a coma. No one told me anything except my father. A week later, I was allowed to return home, but I had to wear an ankle monitor. A cop followed me everywhere, doing nothing but watching me like I was some criminal. The tension at home was unbearable. My father still spoke to me, But there was a distance between us now. I wasn't his little girl anymore. My mother was polite but avoided looking me in the eye. She never touched me. That hurt more than anything. I'd grown up with her hugging me every morning, joking about the chores I'd never do. But now, nothing. And then there was Julie. She didn't speak, but her eyes burned with hatred. She wanted me to say something, anything that would let her explode. I wasn't sure she'd even limit herself to words. I asked my father about it, and that's when I learned the truth. Brian had left Julie. The town's whispers had gotten to him. He couldn't handle the pressure anymore. The mocking, the shame of being involved with the town hoe's sister. He couldn't take it. I never thought Julie loved Brian the way I loved Greg. I always thought their relationship was just a phase, something temporary. I was wrong. After nearly 2 weeks and 5 surgeries, Greg finally woke up. Weak, barely able to stay awake for a few minutes, but he was conscious, and no one told me. Not my parents, not Julie. The only reason I found out was because I overheard them. I caught my mom and Julie sneaking into a bathroom, locking the door behind them. We had multiple bathrooms. They didn't need to go together, not unless they were hiding something from me. I pressed my glass of water against the door and heard Julie whisper, "They're worried about brain damage, but the swelling's gone down. They don't think they'll need to remove part of his skull." I almost dropped the glass. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Julie said that when she was there, Greg had woken up for a few minutes, squeezed her hand, and said her name. I could barely breathe. I opened the door and found my mom looking guilty, while Julie just stared at me. I demanded to know if Greg had woken up from his coma yet. My mom apologized, explaining that my therapist thought it would be too soon for me to see Greg or anyone involved in the incident until they fully assessed my condition. She also mentioned that, given how much I loved Greg, seeing him in his current state might be more harmful than helpful. She described how badly Greg had been hurt, bruised, swollen, with one eye covered and his wrist in a massive cast. I told her I could handle it. I needed to see him. But Julie scoffed at me, dismissing my request and reminding me that his visits were limited to only a few people at a time, with a strict list of approved visitors. Julie seemed to take pleasure in the situation, smirking as she told me about her daily visits to Greg and how Terry, a police officer, often accompanied her. I demanded to speak to Terry, but Julie made it clear that wasn't going to happen. Determined, I insisted I would see Greg no matter what. I knew it wouldn't hurt me, and I believed seeing him would help both of us heal. Julie's response was cold and dismissive, but it was clear she had no intention of letting me see Greg. The truth hit me hard. I realized that my relationship with Julie was broken. She was enjoying my pain, perhaps out of jealousy or resentment over how everything had unfolded. When Greg finally woke up, he refused to see me. He was recovering well physically, but his mental state seemed sharp. He was still Greg. However, every time my dad mentioned me, Greg's expression would darken. It was clear that Greg had decided to cut me out of his life. Despite all this, I tried to visit him, but I was stopped at every turn. I couldn't get past the nurses, and even when I tried sneaking in, they turned me away. My attempts at reconciliation with Julie were futile. She refused to speak to me, and it became evident that she had no intention of forgiving me. Eventually, I saw Greg again, but not how I imagined. He was wheeled out for a public event, surrounded by his family and Julie. I was there, standing in the crowd, watching as the mayor and the governor gave speeches praising Greg, but no one mentioned me. No one acknowledged my role in his life, not even a passing mention. It was a public spectacle, and I felt invisible. I watched as Greg's life seemed to go on without me, and as much as I tried to hold on to hope, the reality of what had happened between us was sinking in. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as they revved to life and started moving, each rider advancing a bike length. One by one they dismounted, approached Greg to shake his hand, and then rode off. But the last 3 riders did something different. They stopped together beside Greg. The first gave him a handshake and exchanged a few words, just like the others. while the second handed Greg a leather vest bearing the logo of their motorcycle club. Greg laughed, saying now he'd need to buy a bike. Then the third rider stayed longer. He spoke with Greg for a while, smiled, and even gave him a hug before climbing onto the back of another rider's motorcycle. As they pulled away, they left a shiny new Harley-Davidson behind, an impressive gift to honor Greg's courage. The crowd cheered as the bike was turned around for Greg to get a better look. He was the hero everyone admired. Meanwhile, I felt invisible. No one seemed to care about me. The media had a field day, using the event to promote their own agendas. The district attorney promised swift justice, while the mayor and governor both used the story for their campaigns. Even the bikers took the opportunity to market themselves as good, law-abiding citizens. It seemed like everyone had something to gain except for the police force and me. Our city's police department had been decimated, its ranks slashed from 12 to 4 officers. Those involved in the incident were fired, including the police chief. Terry, the officer who defied orders, was briefly suspended with pay, but received a commendation for her bravery. The state police captain temporarily took charge of the department until a new police chief could be elected. Meanwhile, the fired officers struggled to find new jobs in law enforcement. The trial began the following week. Most of the bikers pleaded guilty, sparing me from having to testify, though I couldn't have identified many of them anyway. Warrants were issued for the escapees, but no one expected them to be found. As for me, I faced charges: 2 counts of public indecency, inciting a riot, disorderly conduct, and malicious mischief. The fines, including the cost of the rescue operation, amounted to over $10,000. My parents made it clear they wouldn't help pay, so I had to get a job. I ended up working at a diner with Becky. Over time, things calmed down. Brian, after realizing the mistakes he'd made, convinced Julie to take him back. They ended up getting married, which I never saw coming. I was happy for her, mostly because it meant she would stop obsessing over Greg. Greg's life, however, took a different turn. A year later, he married Terry, who had become the new police chief. Julie was her maid of honor, and my mom helped organize the wedding. I wasn't invited. They built a beautiful house on the edge of town and seemed content, but I had my doubts. Greg didn't look at her the way he had looked at me, despite her clear affection for him. I also remembered a dream we once shared about a future together, something that still haunted me. Eventually, my father learned why Greg had defended me despite everything. It turned out that Greg had always planned to break up with me when he found out the truth. But until he did, he had to protect me because, in his eyes, I was still his girlfriend. To him, it was that simple. For the next few years, things didn't change much. My parents slowly began to treat me better, though Julie never fully forgave me. She still wouldn't speak to me, but at least she started answering my questions. My mom kept pressuring Julie about when she would have kids, but Julie never replied. Though we weren't close anymore, I could tell Julie and Brian were having issues. They came over to visit less often, and when they did, there was tension between them. Brian suggested they see a marriage counselor, since they had been trying to conceive for some time. It turned out there were no issues with Brian. He was perfectly healthy. Julie, however, refused to get checked out. After months of Brian pleading and my mother pushing, Julie finally agreed to get tested. My mom reassured her that most fertility issues could be resolved, and Brian promised he would love her no matter what. But there was something in the way Brian said it, like he was trying to prove his love to her. One evening, in a soft voice only I could hear, Julie confessed, "This is what I'm afraid of." Julie went through a full medical examination, including blood work and an internal scan of her reproductive organs. The results were clear. She was perfectly healthy. The doctor even confirmed that she could easily conceive once she stopped taking contraceptives, as she had been on a high-dose prescription. Brian was furious and hurt. My parents tried to comfort him, offering explanations, suggesting Julie might be scared of motherhood at such a young age. I thought back to when Julie was a child, playing with dolls and dreaming of a family of her own. But after the tests, things began to unravel. Their marriage didn't last much longer. Brian was crushed, but Julie seemed almost relieved. He moved out, and she stayed in their apartment. Meanwhile, I began seeing a retired veteran from a nearby town. He was in his 50s, and our relationship was simple and casual, more about companionship than passion, which made me think of Greg in a strange way. It wasn't much, but it was a distraction from everything else. Then, fate intervened. A drunk driver crashed into Terry's car, liquidating her instantly. The tragic part was that she wasn't on duty. She was just on her way to pick up steaks for her and Greg's dinner. The whole town came together for her funeral, and while it was a somber occasion, it sparked something in me. I had always made mistakes chasing fleeting excitement, but that incident made me realize how badly I had messed things up with Greg. I ended things with the retired man and refocused on myself. I didn't want distractions this time. I was ready to fight for what I wanted. I thought about how Greg had once fought for me, and now I needed to fight for him. I scoured the internet to figure out how long I should wait before reaching out to Greg. There were no hard rules, just personal opinions. Some said 24 hours, others mentioned 3 years. Some referred to religious texts, while others just relied on common sense. In the end, I decided to give Greg 3 months. After that, I'd reach out as a friend and see where things went. The 12 weeks seemed to drag on. I got a new haircut like the one I had when we were together, and I started working out. Every day, I practiced the speech I would say to him. When the time came, I was scared. I debated waiting another day, but I couldn't put it off any longer. I borrowed my dad's car without telling him where I was going, knowing he'd think I was visiting my friend in the neighboring town. But this time, I was headed to Greg's house. When I pulled up, I saw his Mustang GT parked in the driveway next to a new one and a third car I didn't recognize. I remembered Greg always talking about getting a second car for the winter months, so his Mustang wouldn't get ruined by the snow. I took a deep breath, straightened my hair, and knocked on the door. It felt like an eternity before it opened. Julie stood there, wearing nothing but a robe that barely covered her body. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she'd just been with Greg. My mind went blank with confusion and anger. Why was she standing there without clothes in Greg's house so soon after Terry's death? Before I could say anything, Julie dropped her robe, standing there without a care in the world. The look in her eyes made it clear. She was ready for more. "You're a damn witch!" I spat out, furious. Seconds later, Greg appeared at the door, quickly throwing on workout pants and a t-shirt. "Are these the auto parts I ordered?" he asked, confused, before turning away from me. "What are you doing here?" I demanded. Julie answered with an indifferent, "What do you care?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the tears came. The weight of the situation crashed down on me and I couldn't hold it back anymore. And then, something I never expected happened. Julie stepped forward, grabbed my hand, and pulled me inside. It was breathtaking. The interior design was flawless. The mix of ceramic tiles, parquet floors, and soft carpets was impressive, and the entire space felt warm and inviting. Julie noticed my gaze sweeping over the room and said, "Some of the carpets are brand new. This one's mine, though. Greg and Terry only liked hardwood and tile. I barely had to redo anything. Terry had amazing taste. She was such a kind person." I was still in shock. "But why are you here?" I managed to ask through my tears. Julie sighed, looking down for a moment before she spoke. "I waited for the right time to mourn properly." "But don't be naive, Penny." She cut herself off, leaning forward. "Terry and I became close in the hospital during those dark days. We both loved Greg, but I always knew a relationship between me and him would be impossible. For starters, I was with Brian, and Greg almost died protecting your sister. It could never work. I married Brian because deep down, I thought he could be something like Greg. He's a good guy, but he's not Greg. They nearly liquidated Greg when he tried to protect you. But then Brian left me the moment people started calling me the hoe's sister. I tried to move on, but I couldn't. It was one of the reasons Brian and I were more like friends than anything else. When he pushed me to get pregnant, I realized it would be a huge mistake. He deserves someone who can make him happy, but I'm not that person. She paused, took a breath, then continued. Terry knew Greg loved her, but there were trust issues after everything you did to him. She loved him the way he loved you. All she ever wanted was his happiness. She even told me that if they ever broke up, I should rush to him without hesitation. The day after she died, Greg had to go through her things, and he found a letter she wrote to me. It said that if anything happened to her, I was the one who loved him almost as much as she did. I gave him the letter and moved in with him that same day. It might seem odd to some people, but for us, it works. Greg loved Terry, but their relationship was more like two good people trying to make it work. There was no real spark. You know that better than anyone. It was the same with me and Brian. Julie gestured as she spoke, as she always did. That wasn't surprising. What was new, though, was the beautiful ring on her finger. I hadn't seen it before, but I knew exactly what it was. The ring I was supposed to have. It wasn't the same one Terry had been buried with, and it wasn't the one Greg had given her. Somehow, Greg hadn't given that ring to Terry, but now Julie was wearing it like it belonged to her. It wasn't just the ring. It was everything. I remembered what my mom had told me. Julie had helped Greg pick out a ring for me, and she'd chosen one she wanted for herself. Now she seemed to have both, the ring and the man she'd always wanted. I was furious, but all my anger faded when I looked into Julie's eyes. There was something different there. Determination, yes, but also joy. A joy that almost burned through her. Penny, she said, her voice steady. I know why you're here. You came to try to get Greg back, and I don't blame you for that. But the only reason I'm speaking to you now is because I'm finally happy. My whole life, I've always come second. Our parents always put you first. You put Becky first. Brian wanted children more to please his parents than because he wanted them with me. But now I have someone who puts me first. Greg and I are both happy. I love him, and he loves me. We light each other up. As for you and Greg, he's happy too. And now that he's happy, he's ready to put the past behind him. Maybe one day, you'll be able to sit down and talk about it. But let me be clear. We're grown women now. All those childish games are behind us. I will fight for Greg, no matter what it takes, and I will leave you in the dust. You and Greg were teenage sweethearts, and that's all. That ship not only sailed, it sank. I should have told Dad where I was going. I should have told him, I murmured. No, you couldn't, Julie said. He doesn't know. No one does. But the truth will come out soon enough. I nodded. Don't worry, Julie, I said, my voice sincere. I may not have been the best sister growing up, but I'll keep your secret. She burst into laughter, walking up to me. I don't know why, but she always seemed more mature than me, even though she was younger. That's not what I meant, she said with a grin. Then she took my hand and placed it gently on her stomach. Your niece or nephew is growing here. In a few weeks it'll be obvious and everyone will know. We're planning a wedding, but like Mom and Dad, we'll rush down the aisle with a baby bump. We'll be married before we become parents. As I looked at Julie, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Genuine happiness. She was glowing. I had heard about the pregnancy glow before, but it was hard to believe until I saw it on her. She was literally shining. I thought back to the way Greg had looked at her before he realized it was me at the door. It was the same look he used to give me. Julie and Greg got married, and the whole town showed up for their wedding, including Becky and me. Less than 3 months later, my niece Cindy was born. Mom was over the moon to finally have a grandchild to spoil. I'm not sure if Greg and Julie were joking or serious when they named her after their grandmother, but it made everyone laugh either way. 15 months after Cindy was born, Julie welcomed her third pregnancy, and Mom gently told her that 3 children were enough. But even then, Julie still had that same spark in her eyes. As an aunt, I found myself stepping in to help with the kids when the grandparents needed a break or weren't around. I didn't mind at all. It gave me a chance to bond with the little ones. Julie's third pregnancy wasn't a surprise. I found her one afternoon napping upstairs in her room, as she often did. During her pregnancies, Julie didn't do much beyond sleeping, eating, using the bathroom, and, of course, showering Greg with affection. I was actually surprised they didn't have more kids. It became clear over time that the bond between Julie and Greg was something I could never have with him. Their connection was undeniable, so strong that they couldn't even stand apart for long. At every family barbecue, no matter how many people came, it was nearly impossible to separate them. Even when the women gathered to talk about our lives or share stories, and the men went off to talk sports and whatever else they did, Julie always made sure to stay within sight of Greg. It wasn't just physical proximity. Even in a crowded room, it was like they existed in a world of their own, and everyone else was just passing through. I couldn't help but admit that Julie, not I, was the one Greg was meant to be with. She was the one who could share a life with him without ever hurting him the way I had. And while I never intended to hurt Greg, I wasn't strong enough to avoid putting myself in situations that would lead to it. Julie was. She had the strength and clarity I lacked. I often pictured her in my place, imagining how she would have reacted to someone like Brett at the amusement park. That obnoxious guy with his sleazy lines trying to persuade her to go off on some ridiculous trip. Julie wouldn't have even entertained him. She wouldn't have given him the time of day. Even now, with 2 children and a third on the way, my sister still radiated beauty. But men didn't approach her. It wasn't just the obvious things, her strong marriage, the ring she wore that was meant for me, but also the way she carried herself. There was a quiet confidence in her. She wasn't rude, but there was a subtle authority in her presence, and men seemed to sense that. They just didn't bother her. And why would they? I knew that Greg would fight for her if it ever came down to it. He would protect her fiercely. I sat in their sunroom, a space that felt like both an indoor and outdoor retreat, and realized it looked a lot like the room from my dream. The one where Greg and I were together, a life I would never have. I smiled, bittersweet as I thought about it. It wasn't real, but for some reason it had become one of my favorite fantasies.